Brady, I loved it. I loved The Brutalist. I really did. I thought it's what a beautiful piece of art.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Here's the thing that also I love. When I start talking to people about The Brutalist, more often than not, people come up to me like, did you know László Tóth, the main character, is not a real person? Like, there seems to be a confusion. A lot of people think that it's based on a real brutalist architect, and I can't tell whether that's a compliment for the world building that you do or just a commentary on American ignorance.
It's probably a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the character is an amalgamation of a lot of, real historical figures like Marcel Breuer, Mies van der Rohe, László Tóth, and many others. So it should, evoke a real person. I think that's a positive thing.
Yeah. When you started creating this story, what was the nugget? What was the thing that got you interested?
In all seriousness, during Trump's first term, before we had a brief intermezzo.
Yeah, you're talking about a billion years ago, way back then? Yeah.
He had a mandate that was called, Make Federalist Buildings Beautiful Again. It's creative.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting that 75 years, on, since the term brutalism was coined, it's still so divisive. And it's interesting because for me, I really feel that post-war psychology and post-war, architecture are intrinsically linked. This film is, that's what it's mostly concerned with.
Yeah, well, I mean, you connect it also to the story, like the immigrant experience, right?
Sure.
I mean, one of the most evocative moments is that first shot, which is sort of someone coming forth upon Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty, right? How do you tie, for somebody who doesn't, I mean, I'm, as experts in brutalist architecture, how would you tie for the lay person how brutalist architecture is connected to sort of the immigrant experience and what that says about a sort of an American experience?
Well, listen, the Bauhaus was shut down by the Nazis in the mid-1930s. It was predominantly Central and Eastern European Jewish architects and designers that were studying there. And so, the mid-century design, it mostly came from immigrant architects. And of course, there was a response to a lot of those buildings and those monuments, which was hypercritical. And because the style of architecture was so unfamiliar, communities wanted it torn down. And they wanted their new neighbors thrown out.
Now, it's interesting, this film, there's so many wonderful performances in it. There's a scene that really stuck with me. There's a scene when Adrien Brody gets off the train and he sees his cousin for the first time. And his cousin lets him know that his wife is still alive. And they embrace, and the whole scene is shot so close, and there's so much physicality between the two of them. They're touching each other's face the whole time. It's so intimate and real and emotional, and frankly, I'd never seen such a physical, intimate scene contextualize something like that. I'm like curious, how do you direct something? Like, was the physicality and the closeness intentional in your direction there? How are you working with actors on something like that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's two brilliant performers in that scene, Alessandro Nivola and Adrien Brody. And the screenplays are very, precise, mostly because they have to be. The film was shot in 33 days. And because the film was 170 pages long, it wasn't, that much time. And so, we don't storyboard mostly because I don't want to adhere too closely to a cartoon. But I want to show up to a space, respond to it, see what, the light is doing, what the performers are doing. And, I just told them I think it would be extremely moving if the two of you are very, very, very physical and very intimate together. Because, when you see your uncle or your father, the patriarch, when they cry, it's like devastated. You just feel shattered by it because you see it so infrequently. So I just thought to see these two, men approaching middle age, sort of being that letting their guard down, especially in the late 1940s, because they just can't help themselves because they've missed each other so much. I thought it was quite beautiful.
Is it true you didn't audition the actors for most of the actors for their roles?
Yeah, that's true. I grew up as a performer for years, and I'm sure you've been in this position at some point, in your career where you're preparing 13 pages of dialogue.
They usually give me the 1 or 2 line parts. Like, if you could just sip this Pepsi and say this one line, we'll see if you're right for the role.
Yeah. Well,
But the 13, 14 sounds great.
But I always think about, dozens and dozens of people's lives that are affected by preparing this material, and usually in the first 15 or 20 seconds they walk in the room, whether or not they're right for the role. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I only ask people to read more material than that if it's really on the fly, like we're doing a cold reading together, especially with kids, kids don't have a prior body of work for you to reference, so that process is a bit more significant. But you usually know after a page or 2 of dialogue, at a maximum. And in general, I just avoid it altogether. We just, make offers to actors we like.
Yeah. Or maybe people you've met for the first time and have sort of a rapport with.
Oh yeah, pal.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
It happens. You made this movie. I mean, this movie's up for 10 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay. And rightfully so. It feels like a film. It's beautiful. You made it for $10 million?
Yeah.
Like, my understanding is to make a film that people go and see, you have to spend $80 million to make something like that. But this is a massive honkin' film for $10 million. Like, what are these other films doing wrong?
Oh, I mean, listen. On the one hand, I'd like to just say it would have been nice to have more money. I don't want anyone to get any ideas like, oh, well, they did that for $10 million. So let's try for 9 on the next one. I think that it's really just due to our collaborators. I mean, my production designer, Judy Becker, is an iconic designer behind Brokeback Mountain, Carol, I'm Not There. My cinematographer, Lil Crawley, and I have worked together for over a decade. We have a shorthand. And most scenes are shot in, 1 or 2 shots. I mean, it's shot like a 1950s melodrama. So it's mostly mediums and masters. And where you lose time is setting up a shot. It's not shooting a shot. Shooting a shot takes as long as the scene takes, 5 minutes. I prefer to schedule things in a way where we're doing one thing very well over and over again, as opposed to 13 things poorly. I think that that we had really great partners on this, producerially as well, that just really understood, what the pillars of the film were and where we could compromise, and really understood where we couldn't. The film was shot on a large format that was engineered in the 1950s called VistaVision, which is it's essentially what it does is, instead of the film being pulled through the gate vertically, it's turned horizontally, so you get more neg area out of regular 35mm stock.
I nodded like I knew what you were talking about, but I realized that was.
I'm sure that'll probably be cut out.
I was like, totally. Got classic 1950s VistaVision.
I was surprised when I got here and I was the only guest. I was assumed I was the second or third guest. This is why. Do you want to hear more about VistaVision?
Yeah, tell me more, Brady, about VistaVision.
I was just thinking about
architecture. Jesus.
Your poor audience was expecting Ariana Grande.
we could never book Ariana Grande. I tell you, you know what? It's funny you joke about this, and it is true. This movie, I will say, I truly love this film. I hope you have nothing but success at the Academy Awards. On paper, nobody sees this film, right?
Sure.
It's 3 hours and. It's 3.5 hours?
Yeah, it's 3 hours and 35 minutes.
There's an intermission in it.
Yeah.
It's about brutalist architecture made for under $10 million, right?
It's a great pitch.
It's a great pitch. Shot on VistaVision.
Yeah.
Inspired by 1950s melodramatic cinema. This up against the latest Marvel movie is a tough pitch. But I would say what is fascinating is the experience. It feels like such an experience to go to it. We had Francis Ford Coppola on this show, and he talked about his most recent film, and he really wanted to eventize film. He's like, so many people are watching this at home now, and going to see it in the theater, experiencing the intermission with people at the theater, hearing people talk about it as they're getting popcorn, using the restroom, like, it's changing. It feels different than watching it at home. It feels different than watching just a regular hour-and-a-half Marvel film. Do you think there might be some trend towards things that are a little bit longer, that intermissions might be something that are more...
I mean, listen, it wasn't that long ago. You know, in the 1970s, movies like Midnight Cowboy were commercially viable. And I really hope that we get back to that. Our industry changed for a lot of reasons, partially because of streaming, partially because of COVID, partially because of the strikes, you know, and I understand why companies are more risk averse than ever. However, if you look at the crop of nominees this year, you know, they're really radical, strange films. They're strange propositions, which I think should signal for everyone that audiences do want daring, original, provocative films. And I think it's very. I'm glad you agree. I really. I respect audiences, and I believe that audiences, are really, really clever, and they're more clever than ever because there's so much information out there about how movies are made, and there's an awareness of the post-production process and visual effects, et cetera. So, they're really savvy, and I think it's important that we treat them with respect.
Awesome. Well, couldn't be better said. The Brutalist is in theaters everywhere. Brady Corbet.